When I made my Lennon the Bunny video, I honestly wasn't really used to being criticized or having my own rabbit care under a microscope. So there are a lot of things that I did in the video that I've received a lot of questions about. I will have to admit that my rabbit care isn't completely perfect, so this is going to be a video of me admitting to a few things that I've done wrong. But I do think all these things deserve to be addressed, and I think you guys deserve answers, so let's start. The first kind of mistake in that video was that I actually had a cord hanging right above my rabbit's cage, actually near their litter box if you guys want to go back and look at it. Like I said before, I wasn't really used to having my own rabbit care criticized, and I'd become really accustomed to just doing what I knew worked for my rabbits. Personally, my rabbits aren't very big chewers and they've never showed any interest in cords before, and I changed their setup up quite often. So when I wanted to have their setup against that side of the room and there was the Wi-Fi cord there, I didn't really think much of it, so I kind of just had it like that. I personally never had any issues with them chewing it or showing any interest towards it. However, I do realize that it's pretty dangerous and you never really know with rabbits. They can go years without chewing anything and then one day they just chew it completely. So I am very fortunate that I had nothing go wrong, but I also realized that it was kind of stupid and immature for me to do, especially considering that a lot of people have watched that video, and I hope no one takes it the wrong way and tries to do the same thing with their rabbits. People always ask me why there's some pets that are in videos more than others. Like there's one sugar glider who's in like 90% of the sugar glider videos, and my white rabbit is in way more of them than my lop, just because he's an attention hog and wherever I move the camera he runs to it. So anyways, another thing kind of along the same lines of the cord was I actually had a graham cracker box in there which was covered in ink, which is not the best thing for rabbits to chew. I personally, like I said, my rabbits aren't big chewers, so I kind of just added it in there as a different foraging toy. However, if you do look at the video, there actually was some chew marks on it, so they obviously had been messing with it. I think not as much as people think because I had already cut a hole, so they chewed a little bit around the hole, and I did take it out after I received the comments. Again, when you have pets for a while, you kind of just get really comfortable doing certain things because they haven't had anything bad happen before. But I completely agree that that was pretty irresponsible of me to do, and now I'm a lot more careful about what things I do have in their cage, especially things with ink. Those were the two main mistakes in the video and things that I've actually regretted, but there are a couple other things that I get a lot of comments about, and I think these are mainly a misunderstanding. I don't want this video to come off as defensive because I completely realize that my rabbit care isn't perfect, and I've tried to acknowledge and own up to a lot of my mistakes. However, I do still stand by these different things, so I hope it doesn't come off as defensive and rude, but I also want to share my perspective. The first thing a lot of people ask me about is why that pet room was pitch black at the beginning of the video. First of all, it actually wasn't pitch black. It kind of just looked that way because it was going from a fully lit room to a dark room, and the way the camera picked it up, it made it look like it was completely pitch black, which wasn't really the case. Even though it wasn't pitch black, I will agree that it was quite dark, and that's because it was filmed at night. I think this might be really disorienting to people because most YouTubers tend to film their videos during the day, but I was in college at the time and I think it was like 2 or 3 a.m. when I filmed the video, so it was really pitch black outside and I didn't have any extra lighting in the room, so it kind of looked pretty dark in the room. Even though the idea of keeping animals in a dark room seems kind of cruel and even abusive, it's actually what they kind of do need. Animals need a day and night cycle just like people do. If it was light 24/7 for even humans, our bodies would be confused and we wouldn't realize when it was night and when we should be sleeping, or when it's day and when we should be waking up. The same thing is with rabbits. They really rely on the natural sun and the weather patterns to keep in touch with the seasons and different things that are happening during the day. Some people are a lot stricter with the day and night cycle than I am. Some people have artificial lighting that turns on for 12 hours during the day and then turns off for 12 hours, and when it's off, they never turn on the lights. I'm personally not that strict. I kind of just go with however the sun does. So in some seasons there are more lights, and in other seasons, like when that was filmed during the winter, it gets dark faster, and it usually gets a lot darker when it does get dark. I think this works well for me and my animals, and I think it's the most natural option. I do like my animals to have somewhat of an idea of what time of year it is, even though of course they are inside, and if it's snowing outside, I don't necessarily want to replicate that indoors. I do like them to know the difference between winter and spring based off of the light. So yes, the room is dark, and the room is dark every single night. I have now added a nightlight in there simply because I got so many comments about it and I thought what the heck, it might be better to have a little bit of light in there. However, I really don't think it's needed, and I also do think that it's important that your animals aren't in a fully lit room 24/7. I don't think any of your animals probably are, but I think this is just a misunderstanding since most YouTubers do film during the day. The next thing, which seemed to trigger a lot of people, which is kind of funny to me, is the fact that I threw my rabbit's pellets on the ground. I throw my rabbit's pellets on the ground because it's called scatter feeding. Rabbits in the wild are natural grazers and they spend their entire day foraging and looking for different foods. When they graze, they aren't eating a large amount of food at one time, they're just eating little bits throughout the day, and that's what's the most natural and that's what their digestive system was built for. Also, rabbits are really intelligent, more so than people think, and they love doing different puzzles and mind games to keep themselves enriched. It's really important that we realize that rabbits are different than dogs and cats. Dogs and cats are predators, so when they kill a meal, they eat most of their meal at once because if they wanted to graze on it throughout the day, it would probably be eaten by some other animals. So they're used to eating big chunks of meal at once. However, rabbits, that's not natural for them. They're prey animals. They spend their entire day being on lookout from their predators and just finding and munching on whatever food that they can. Again, from a human perspective, it can seem really cruel to just carelessly throw your animal's food on the ground, and I can completely see why it looks like that. I didn't realize how uncommon scatter feeding was with rabbits. It's quite common with smaller animals like hamsters, gerbils, and mice, and it's very enriching for them, and for the same reason it's enriching for rabbits. If you guys haven't tried it, I'd highly recommend it. It is a little bit more of a mess to clean up, but your rabbits are gonna love it so much more. I also get lots of comments on how much pellets I feed and whether I'm feeding too much or too little. I personally only use pellets as a treat. I don't think it's essential to their diet, especially considering that most of their diet is hay, and I'd rather feed high quality veggies than pellets, or even the best pellets have a lot of fillers. So I'm not sure on the exact amount, but I think it's about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons that they get every day or every other day, and they really enjoy it. And even though it's not completely necessary and I don't use it as a real part of their diet, I do still like to feed a high quality pellet. I personally right now am feeding the Sherwood brand of adult rabbit pellets, and that's working well for me and my rabbits. I think some people also saw some colored things mixed in and they thought I was feeding like a cheap brand of those colorful pellets. It was not. It was actually the Rosewood brand of herbs. That's completely safe for rabbits. Some people take out the corn and feed it. I've always fed it with the corn and never had any issues. But if there were any colorful pieces, you're probably just looking at the different herbs and the flowers. Next thing that I get a lot is that cages are very bad for rabbits. This is kind of funny to me. It kind of reminds me of the tubs versus tanks arguments for snakes. Cages are just anything that you keep your rabbit in. I think it's really ridiculous that people consider some pens to not be cages, or just because you're free roaming in a room that's not a cage. It's still technically an enclosure, I guess. Even if you're free roaming them in your house, that's still kind of like a cage. So I know that's a pretty extreme example, but cages aren't bad for rabbits. It's just really important that you have the proper amount of space that you use. Most store-bought cages don't offer the proper amount of space, which is why in the rabbit community we don't really recommend them. But rabbit pens work really well. In the beginning of the video, I did kind of show an overview of the pet room, and I tried to show the entire cage, but I think it just comes across pretty small on camera. The cage at the time was actually 33 square feet, which is far above the house rabbit minimum, even for 2 rabbits. And I think a lot of people also misinterpret, especially from Lorelai's channel, since she's not mainly a rabbit pen channel. A lot of people think that if you have your rabbit in a pen, that they're not getting any free roam time. I guess this is kind of fair because in the video when I showed the pet room, it was quite messy and not really rabbit proofed. So I think a lot of people assume that the rabbit just stayed in the cage 24/7, which is completely not the case. The reason that I even had the rabbits in the cage opposed to free roaming the entire room is so that they can get out of cage time. Out of cage time is so essential for any animal that you have, regardless of how big their cage is, because even if they have a huge enclosure, imagine never being able to leave. Even as people, we hate staying in our homes 24/7, even though we have so many opportunities like going to school, going to the grocery shopping, going to different extracurriculars where we leave the house. Still, staying in the house all the time seems boring to us. So just imagine how boring it would be for the animals when they truly never get a chance to leave. So to clarify, even though my rabbits were in a pen for the video, they do have hours of out of cage time every single day. And especially with rabbits, it's pretty easy to tell based on their bodies and their temperaments if they're being well cared for. And I hope you guys can see, especially those of you familiar with rabbit body language, that these guys are extremely healthy and well cared for and very spoiled. Another question I get asked a lot is why I don't free roam in my pet room. I kind of hate answering this question because it just sounds like a lot of excuses, but the main reason I don't free roam in my pet room, which I don't really consider that to be free roam. I think free roam is when you share a living space with your rabbit. If I were to just quote unquote free roam them in the pet room, it would honestly just be the same as expanding their cage to be the size of the pet room. So the reason I don't do that is because I think having out of cage time is more essential for rabbits than it is to have an extremely large cage. Of course, having a sufficiently sized cage, which they did have and they still do, is extremely important. Also, out of cage time I think is just as important, and with my specific circumstances, I wouldn't have been able to offer out of cage time since the room they were in was directly connected to our dance studio, and I was home in the evenings, and during the evenings we also is when we teach dance class. So pretty much I wouldn't have been able to give them out of cage time. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to give them out of cage time. So it just worked easier for me to have them in the pen. So right when I came home from college, I would just let them free roam in their room for hours and then I'd put them back at night. Quite often is why my cage was so crowded and people saying that my rabbits had absolutely no room to run around in. I kind of agree with this because especially in the part where I was filming, the cage was extremely crowded. I kind of just do a bunch of random setups and sometimes I lose track of exactly how much stuff I add in there, especially if I'm just adding more and more throughout the week. So even though the cage was so crowded, the rabbits did have tons of free roam time, again for hours a day. So they did have a chance to do binkies and hops and run around, which is really essential for rabbits. So they weren't deprived of that in any way. But especially now, I am trying to do a little bit more quote unquote like minimalistic setups just so they have more room. I think that they enjoy both. I think they definitely enjoy the more cluttered setups because it gives them a bunch of things to do and kind of like a bunch of obstacles to run around. But I also definitely see that they enjoy having a very minimal setup with just a bunch of room to run around and play. And then the last thing a lot of people ask me is why my rabbits were chewing on the cage bars, and isn't this evidence that they're unhappy in their pen or that their pen is too small? Well, when rabbits chew on their cage bars, it really just means that they want to get out. It doesn't necessarily tell you why. So sometimes rabbits want to get out because the pen is too small or because they don't have enough free roam time and they're just really frustrated and they want to be able to go out and run around. But my rabbits were specifically biting on the pen or the bars because they wanted to come to me because I was getting their treats. I hate saying the word triggering, and I think I've said it a lot of times in this video, but with those of you who have rabbits, I think you'll know that there are a lot of sounds that they find kind of triggering. One of my rabbits' most triggering sounds is when they hear me rustling like the pellet bag. They just get super excited and super anxious and they want to come and get those pellets right then and there. They literally can't contain themselves. I think I'll have to do a video just to show you how food obsessed they are and how they react, especially because they get pellets like so little and not very often. When they do hear me going through the pellets, they get so excited. So that's when they started biting the cage bars. Also, especially that white rabbit, Sachin, he's pretty bonded to me. So right when I come in the room, I usually try to give them attention. But I think I was like focused more on the video, so I wasn't really giving them pets or letting them out for any free range time. During the video, they did have free range time that day. So I think because of that, he was just frustrated and he wanted to come out. Again, whether or not you want to believe me is your choice, but I hope you guys realize that if rabbits are consistently chewing on cage bars, you'll actually see probably marks on the cage where the coating has rubbed off, or you should actually be able to see it on their actual fur. Since their face is constantly pressed up against the bars, they actually tend to start losing fur there, and they might even get bloody or a little bit of scabs there. So my rabbits don't have any of that, so I hope that's kind of evidence that it's not really a regular habit. And if you want to see my other videos, even this one when they're just free ranging outside, bar chewing is not really something that they do very often or pretty much at all. It's kind of like a dog scratching at the door. A dog will scratch at the door if they're kind of in an uncomfortable situation and they really want to get out. Like maybe you've locked them in your bedroom and they're just really sick of you and they want to leave, they'll scratch at the door. but they'll also scratch at the door right when you come home from work or school. And it doesn't mean they hate the house and they want to get out. It just means they want to come see you, which kind of implies that they want to get out of the house because you're not in the house yet. I hope that makes sense. I guess what I'm saying is bar chewing does mean that rabbits want to get out. My rabbits wanted to get out of the cage, and usually I don't let it get to the point of bar chewing because it's pretty bad for their teeth to be chewing on metal. That's not what they were designed to do. But I was kind of focused on getting the shots that I wanted. That I kind of ignored their initial behavior, which is usually just them rattling the bars, and sometimes they'll even try to climb it if they really want the pellets. So I kind of ignored those signs, which is why they started chewing the bars, because they were just so excited and they couldn't contain themselves. So I hope this answered some of my most commonly asked care questions. I will say again that I don't have perfect rabbit care, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. There's always so much room for improvement, and especially as a person who is not a full-time animal keeper, I just do this as a hobby for fun. I honestly can only put in so much time, resources, and money into it. If I ever felt that the amount of time, money, and resources I could put in wasn't enough for them to be cared for adequately, I would obviously consider rehoming or surrendering them to a really good rabbit shelter. But until that's the case, I think I'm very happy with how I'm caring for them. They're also very happy, which is the most important part.